My name's Dr. Ken Walker and I'm the Senior Curator of Entomology at Museum Victoria, and I've got 3 million specimens here which date back from 1742 is the oldest butterfly we have here. A bee is simply a wasp that has decided to feed its young a protein source from pollen. They came from a group of wasps called digger wasps, and the digger wasp digs a hole in the ground. It goes out, catches a caterpillar and brings it back and literally tears the caterpillar apart and feeds the tissue to its developing young. The developing young need protein to be able to build muscle tissue. Originally, wasps they were predators, and they collected particularly caterpillars. About 120 million years ago was when the flowering plants first came onto the world. And so there was a whole new food source that was available. And whenever nature finds a new food source, then something will move into it and exploit it. And then all these flowers developed. And so a group of them said, well, how about if we use pollen as their protein source rather than using live animal tissue? And so to do that, they had to do a number of things. There were some major evolutionary things they had to do. To carry pollen, you need a branched hair. If you've got a single hair, a straight hair, you can't carry pollen. Pollen falls off it. So you needed branched hairs. And that was the first big thing bees had to evolve from wasps. And that's the main character that you differentiate a wasp from a bee. Wasps have got simple hair, whereas bees have got branched hairs. So then the bees developed branched hairs, but they had to then say, well, where are we going to carry the pollen? And so they collect pollen with their forelegs, but they carry it always at the back of the bee, either on the hind legs or on the underneath of the abdomen. And these special pollen-carrying areas are called scopi, and they're full of branched hairs. So the first thing that we had to do was to develop branched hairs. Then they had to develop an area where there was a large concentration of these branched hairs. Third thing they had to develop was how do you get the pollen from the forelegs to the back of the body, the hind legs, where the pollen-carrying areas are. So the bees had developed special grooming techniques. So wasps cannot groom themselves as bees do. So as I said, the bees collect pollen, and so they collect pollen with their forelegs. They then put it into They close the mid-leg around the foreleg and drag it through. And that leaves the pollen on the comb of the mid-leg. And from there, they then transfer it to the scopi, the pollen-carrying areas at the back of the body. And they do this very quickly. If ever you watch a bee, that's and then down like that. So it's all done very, very quickly. But it's something that wasps can't do. Sometimes if you look at a flower that's got a lot of pollen and you'll see wasps there, you'll often see the wasps absolutely covered in pollen because they can't groom themselves. They can't get it off. Whereas you rarely see a bee that's covered in pollen except for large amounts on the hind leg. So that's what makes a bee. It's a wasp that simply has decided to use pollen as a protein source to feed its young. In some cases, we have bees that can visit any kind of flower, and they are called polylectic. We have bees that can only visit a certain group, such as the Australian bees can only go on the one plant family, Myrtaceae, and they're called oligolectic. And then occasionally you'll get a species of bee that can only visit one species of flower, and that's called monolectic. There are two types of branched hairs. One branched hair is where there's a central shaft, and at the end of the shaft there's a whole lot of branches come out. So think of a broom. The second way of branched hairs is like a feather. And those are the two types of hairs that bees have evolved to be able to carry pollen. Now, depending on whether you've got a feather or whether you've got a broom or a branched hair, determines what kind of pollen you can collect, which determines what kind of plant you visit or plants that you visit. But it's what the pollen grain looks like and how it can be carried to take it back to their nest to be able to feed their young. And that's the difference between a wasp and a bee. Believe it or not, 1 in every 3 mouthfuls of food you eat is a direct result of pollination. So just think about that. Think if we had no apples or oranges, imagine how your diet would be without having pollination. Indeed, Albert Einstein said that if all the bees disappeared tomorrow, the human race would disappear in about 3 years.